I'm Jonathan Brent. I'm Executive Director of the YIVO Institute, and I'm delighted to welcome so many people here whom I haven't seen here at YIVO for a long time, and some not at all. I think this tells me that we are embarking on a series of programs that will be breaking new ground for this institute in terms of exploring Jewish-Polish relations, not just as they were in the 19th century and before World War II, but after World War II, in the work of so many great artists, so many great writers, so many great thinkers. It's a rich and deep and complex culture that is certainly part of our intellectual world here at YIVO, and I wish to thank very, very much the Polish Institute, the Polish Cultural Institute, for really bringing this tonight's program to my attention and making this possible. I also wish to thank the Emanuel Ringelblum Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw for helping us put this together, and especially Wanda Siedlecka and Bartek Remisko, the Deputy Director, Vice Consul of the Polish Cultural Institute, for approaching us. They are our friends. We will work with them more in the future, and I think tonight's program is going to be very stimulating, very rich, and certainly it's going to be on something I have had a strong interest in, but much less actual knowledge of for a long, long time, which is post-war Polish art and the Jewish element in that. Let me read. Tonight's event will proceed in the following fashion. I will read the bios of the people who will be in the conversation, and to be followed by a talk, an introductory talk about the life and art of Krystiana Robb-Narbutt. Our panelists this evening are Marek Bartelik, Professor of Modern and Contemporary Art at Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art in New York, where he has taught since 1996. He has also been a visiting professor at Yale and MIT. Professor Bartelik is a graduate critic in residence at Maryland Institute of Art in Baltimore and has lectured nationally and internationally. He currently serves as president of the International Association of Art Critics. Irina Grudzinska-Gross, who will be our moderator tonight, is Associate Research Scholar and Lecturer in the Department of Slavic Studies at Princeton University, where her research focuses on European intellectual history and literature. She has also held academic appointments at the Polish Academy of Science, Boston University, and New York University. Professor Gross has authored or edited numerous works, and I'm very proud to say I've been the publisher of one of them at Yale University Press on Czesław Miłosz and Joseph Brodsky, a fellowship of poets, and we have been talking about having a program here on precisely that subject in the near future. Wanda Siedlecka is artist and designer. After graduating from the Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw, Poland, she worked as director of a nonprofit gallery, curated shows, and wrote catalog essays. Since 1982, she has lived in New York, where she has worked as designer for book publishers. She runs The Painters, a nonprofit gallery in upstate New York, and is co-editor with Dorota Jarecka of the publication Krystiana Robb-Narbutt, Drawings, Objects, Studio, that has recently been published. Dorota Jarecka is an art critic and art historian based in Warsaw. She was co-curator with Barbara Piwowarska of the show Erna Rosenstein, I Can Repeat Only Unconsciously, at the Fugue Gallery Foundation in Warsaw, 2011, and co-editor with Wanda Siedlecka of the publication Krystiana Robb-Narbutt Drawings Object Studio. In 2012, she received the Jerzy Stauda Prize for Art Criticism. And now, Irina, if you would come and say some words.
Good evening. My name is Irena Grudzińska-Gross, and I am going to be the moderator, and I'm here only to really thank YIVO and thank Jonathan Brent for hosting this event, and of course thank the Polish Cultural Institute in New York and the Polish Jewish Institute that was thanked here for all these three institutions that really came together to offer us this what is going to be a very wonderful evening. I will be back at the end of the speeches and will moderate discussion first among the panelists, and then we'll open for conversation with the public. So please, Professor Bartelik.
Well, thank you, Jonathan, and for hosting us here. It's really an exciting moment for many reasons, and I guess I will speak about those reasons in a moment. And thank you, Wanda, for inviting me to participate in this event. I'm very honored. I have to say that I have been given 10 minutes, so to speak about an artist, well, anyone, but an artist like Krystiana in 10 minutes, it's basically impossible. So I will maybe reduce my speech to several moments in our encounter. Krystiana was a friend, so obviously I will be partial in my look at her, but at the same time I think I will try to be as just as possible. I think she was a true phenomenon among Polish artists, and I think you will realize it for those of you who don't know her work and her life. I think you will realize how special she was. I have to say that to speak about a Polish artist who is completely unknown in New York, it's obviously a big challenge as well. To speak about a Polish artist who is not even very well known in Poland nowadays adds kind of additional dimension to the dilemma how to talk about Krystiana. I'm saying that she's not very well known in Poland for I think because what happened that there were many moments in Polish history and art history which are sort of transitional moments or moments of change. And I think Krystiana belongs maybe to the latest one, or her presence among artists, Polish artists, belongs to that moment of transition, the latest transition, major transition, which was in the late 1980s and early 90s, the fall of the Berlin Wall, and then things change. What happens that when things changed, they changed in many aspects of life, including the way how Polish art has been re-evaluated. And I think Krystiana belongs to two parts, but she really is rooted in the part which is let's say, 1989, the period. I mean, she went to the Fine Arts Academy in Warsaw in the late 1960s and finished in the early 1970s. She was very active in the 70s and 80s and 90s and so on until her death. But the moment that sort of I think that created Krystiana as an artistic phenomenon is really the 70s. And that was a very particular moment in Polish art history, because that was the time when after the period, after World War II, when there were, many restrictions, but also artists were experimenting in different directions. In the 1970s, there was quite a big change in terms of freedom, and artists like Krystiana actually benefited from the change. There was a lot of experimentation. There was more information about what was happening elsewhere in the world. What's I think remarkable that Krystiana, in a way, she absorbed all those news about pop art, about conceptual art, and so on, minimal art. But at the same time, she remained a Krystiana. She was very much interested in formulating her own language, which I think is very unique, and maybe that's why it's sometimes difficult to fit her into movements, and that's why perhaps she's not as acknowledged as she should be. I went to Poland for the first time in 1992. I left Poland in 1981, so it was 10 years, a very long 10 years, because, as you know, 1980s and 1990s were quite different. And one of actually Wanda was the person who introduced me to Krystiana, and that's how our friendship originated. I went there also as a reviewer. I wrote, I've been writing for quite a long time for Art Forum, so when I went to Poland, I was trying to cover different exhibitions in Poland, and one of those exhibitions was a group exhibition. I think it was 1992 or 1993. It was called 4 Elements, and it was sort of a feminist exhibition, but an old style, so to speak, because there were 12 women in the show, and they were organized in 4 groups, each one representing a different element. I think Krystiana was in the air kind of section, and there was the fire section, water section, and so on, and earth, right? Oh no, she was in the earth section, I think. That makes more sense. But that's an anecdote. So I wrote a review, and I liked the work that she included in that show, which was a small medical cabinet covered with earth, and there was something else, but. Anyway, we reproduced that work in Art Forum, and then this was 1992-93. Krystiana, 6 months later, she told me that she received many phone calls from different collectors from the West who wanted to purchase that work. But she threw out that cabinet because for her, this was the only time, this was for that moment. This wasn't something that... So I said, Krystiana, why didn't you recreate it? It didn't occur to her even to sort of recreate it for the sake of having it sold to a collector in the West. I'm saying this because it shows how differently people thought about art and what it means and how it becomes a collectible object and so on. So obviously that sort of warmed my heart greatly. As I said, Krystiana was a phenomenon, and I think what made her also special that she was unique, and then she was able to bridge a lot of generations, a lot of milieus, a lot of different groups of people. She was very present in the artistic scene, on the artistic scene in Poland. And yet she always was on her own, in a way. And so that was something which I haven't seen much anywhere, not in Poland. People who are able to go beyond the divisions which, as you know, in the art world exist quite strongly. So that's what made her in some way very unique too, that she was very curious what was happening among different generations, but at the same time she kept a distance, and she would always say, let's wait and see what will happen. I wrote about Krystiana on the occasion of her retrospective, which she had in the late 1990s at the National Gallery in Warsaw, Zachęta. This was her major exhibition, and I remember I used to stay with Krystiana in her when I went to Poland, so obviously we were very close. And we would go to the kitchen and have these long conversations about everything. And she would always ask me, Marek, but how it is really? So I had to explain to her how really things were, which sometimes was very difficult. And then we debated about the title of the show. I think it was really a very important show and very important for her, very important for everybody. So I suggested that she put something with nostalgia, maybe because there were some works that she did with the subject of nostalgia, and she said, and I mentioned that I was reading a book by Simone Signoret, which had sort of a nostalgia in the title, and I think she didn't like that I mentioned an actress, and then sort of putting an actress as her kind of inspiration for her exhibition. So that was already a no from her. But so we discussed nostalgia. We didn't go anywhere. But then, as Krystiana always did, her way, after we disposed the idea of having anything to do with nostalgia, she said she hated the word nostalgia. So she made a whole series of works that have nostalgia in the title, and then they have flowers and a lot of things. So this was, I guess, Krystiana's way to comment on what's happening around her, and the way how she could respond to those things in her work. Now, in 2006, I was asked to organize an exhibition here in Hartford, Connecticut, in a non-for-profit space called Real Art Ways. And this was an interesting show because, in a way, we gathered people from of Polish descent, but from very different backgrounds and from very different places. So I invited people from Poland. There were some major artists from Poland. There were some Polish artists from the United States. I invited Annabella Geiger from Brazil, whose parents emigrated to Brazil in the early 20th century. And Annabella, basically her memory of Poland was through her parents. And she would say that, again, another anecdote, she would say that her mother loved so much everything Polish that when Annabella asked her about Poland, everything was the best. So one day Annabella said, "What about the coffee?" And her mother said, "Well, the Polish coffee is the best. How can you even compare it to anything else?" So Annabella was in the show, and Krystiana had a beautiful display, and we put her little matchboxes, which she liked to decorate and put little objects inside, and then usually she gave them to her friends. Maybe Dorota will show some of those boxes. They were fantastic. But the show went very well. We had a review in the New York Times and so on. But that's not that important. This was just a few months before she died. So quite after she passed away. So she didn't come to the show. We just corresponded, and then we put her work on display. She wrote a letter to me, and I would like to finish my presentation with just quoting from that letter, because I think it's beautiful, and in a way it reflects who Krystiana was. So I just have to be sure that I'm not getting too emotional. So she wrote in Polish, and we translated this. "It seems that my problem with starting the day come from the fact that a pebble from the other side of the wall has remained in me. So far, I have been learning to get to know the pebble. What comes next, I don't know, and neither do you. In any case, I'm learning that art equals life, and this seems to unite us." Thank you.
Hello. I also would like to thank YIVO, Institute for Jewish Research, for inviting us and for this opportunity to present Krystiana Robb-Narbutt art and a book about her. I have to say that I'm very pleased and honored to be here and happy to present Krystiana some of her achievements. The launching of the book on Krystiana Robb-Narbutt took place in Warsaw a year ago at the Zachęta Gallery of Art, the leading institution of contemporary art in Poland. It gathered a large audience. Her contribution to contemporary art in Poland is important for many reasons. One of them is that she touched upon the very difficult issues of trauma and memory of the Holocaust. Another is the feminist aspect of her work. The book, the collection of essays, was initiated by a group of friends who, after Robb-Narbutt's death from cancer in 2006, established a foundation to preserve her work and her legacy, and published. The book was published by the foundation together with Zachęta Gallery. And the book was conceived by two of us, by Wanda and me. Wanda actually invited me because she got the mission to compose the book, and we are friends, so we started to work together, and that was the result. And our goal was to make Robb-Narbutt's art part of the Polish art history narrative. That was the reason we invited young and middle generation writers to reflect upon her work. Let me talk first about the artist's background. She was born in Warsaw in 1945, at the end of the war. Her mother, Franciszka Robb-Narbutt, born Cytryn Eisenberg, was a painter, illustrator, and an art teacher. During the war, she took part in the partisan movement of the left-wing underground. She came from the family of publishers based for many years in Warsaw. Before the war, they owned the publishing house Księgarnia Popularna, Popular Bookstore, which published books in Polish and Yiddish. Krystiana's father, Ignacy, born Rosenfarb, was a writer and journalist. He fought in the World War II, first in the Polish army, then in the partisan resistance movement, where he was a commander, well known for being courageous. Both of her parents lost nearly all of their family in the Holocaust. Her mother was rescued from the Warsaw Ghetto by her husband. The rest of the maternal family didn't survive. And I will show you Krystiana. And that's when she was young, in the 70s. That's one of her recent photos. And her studio in Warsaw, that is still preserved in her apartment and kept by her husband, Michał Wejroch. And here is her work chest from 2006, and among these books and papers, photos, we could see a photo by her mother, Franciszka. Her father, Ignacy, also lost his family during the war. But what should be stressed, and what is typical for this generation of Holocaust survivors in Poland, those memories were deeply buried. Robb-Narbutt knew of her parents' identity, but as she was always saying, they hardly spoke about the past, and she didn't ask. So this is the background of her work, which gives a personal testimony of the Holocaust in the series of assemblages titled Memory Fugue. That's the installation, how the work was installed in 2006 in Warsaw. In 2005, Robb-Narbutt joined efforts by the Warsaw Jewish community to explore and preserve the history of Warsaw Jews. She supported the initiative of her friend, an artist, Krystyna Piotrowska, to create site-specific installations during the first Jewish culture festival, Singers Warsaw. Both artists created installations in one of the few remaining buildings on the Próżna Street. that the street at the beginning of the war was part of the ghetto. The installations won the award of the Pokaz Klub of Art Criticism in Warsaw and initiated an artistic event called Próżna Street, an annual group show. The series Memory Fugue was shown here in 2006, that's the image, during the first group show on Próżna Street. The Memory Fugue series consists of the box assemblages created by the artist at the end of her life, around 2005-2006. Robb-Narbutt, who was a painter by training and who was making drawings all her life, at the end of her career turned to objects. She started to create box assemblages which make us think of Joseph Cornell, and Paweł Leszkowicz, one of the authors of our book, called them hidden gems of Polish contemporary art. The title of Memory Fugue is inspired by the poem Death Fugue by Paul Celan. Each box assemblage from the series is devoted to another family member and acts as a form of traumatic memory and fantasy about the deceased person. This is also suggested in the titles of the works. In the box Róża, worried about the twins, a rose flower impaled on sharp nails conveys Róża's fear for her family. Róża was the artist's maternal aunt who, along with her husband and children, was forced to move to the ghetto. This train in the assemblage called the train Róża boarded was bound for Switzerland serves as an allegory of the train that carried them to the death camp. The twins, Róża's small kids, are the focus of the box assemblage featuring dolls, playing dice, and children trinkets, which is called Twins Could Have Played This Way. For her, the creation of Memory Fugue was a groundbreaking event. She always said that it was the most difficult venture, the most difficult work during whole her life. She realized that for the first time in a direct way she touched upon the subject of the tragic loss of her own family. And the history behind these pieces is made clear thanks to the artist's commentary, which she placed next to each box. We see a small pieces of paper with titles. She thought it was very important to make clear what each box is about. For instance, in these two boxes, in two of the boxes from the series, she used sugar in reference to her family members who died of diabetes. The piece titled "Lucky is the one who dies in his own bed 3 days before ghetto is established" tells the story of her grandmother Pessa, who died in a diabetic coma 2 days before they were due to move into the ghetto. And Paweł Leszkowicz noted that sugar used by the artist conveys double meaning. He wrote, quote, "In the whole of Robb-Narbutt practice, this is where trauma is most pronounced, while the sweetness, no longer able to protect one from despair, becomes another ingredient of death, while nonetheless still being the sweetness of one's ultimate liberation." Another object related to cultivating the family memory is chest from 2006, and it's very interesting that she bring up the subject at the very end of her life. She thought, maybe she felt that she wants to say something really important. This is an old wooden chest, and inside are photographs of the artist's parents, family correspondence, as well as books printed in the Hebrew alphabet. The book here could relate not only to the fact that, being a poet, Robb-Narbutt had published books herself, but also to the history of her family, who was in publishing business. While transformed into art, these objects become a gift for the individual and collective culture of remembrance. The works which I am describing have a direct reference to Holocaust, but still her whole work, starting with the drawings created in 1960s and 1970s, could be also seen as a struggle with the traumatic past. The fact that in Poland until 1990s these issues were not often present in the visual arts. One of the reasons was the political situation. The communist ideology did not embrace mourning and instead imposed censorship and repression of memory. It might not have been obvious to the viewer, but in Robb-Narbutt's art, the subject of memory was always present. As Agata Jakubowska, another author of the book, writes about her early drawings from the series Nests. That's the Nest series from the 70s. All the egg-like or embryonic forms are either bound with rope or wire or pricked with long needles. They have no chance to develop fully. They float in a welcoming substance that is unable to protect them. Jakubowska is writing from the feminist point of view. As she points out, what should be not overlooked is Robb-Narbutt's relationship with her mother. It is an ambiguous relation since, in her case, the mother was a source of life and at the same time a link to the difficult events. Later, in the 1970s and 1980s, the artist developed her own dotted technique. These are very small pieces on paper. Her works on paper were composed of tiny dots done in a very meticulous way. She compared the way she worked to meditation. The recurring motif was mountain or an island. To us, these works are impossible to grasp in terms of a landscape or abstraction art. They are subtle and harmonious, emanating soft light, representing welcoming and open space. But one could also connect them to the constant and repetitive work of mourning, of remembrance. They represent a complex approach to life, affirmative and at the same time sober. But also they could be seen in a perspective of contemporary conceptual art, since it is not the form that constitutes their meaning, but repetition and seriality. I need to mention that around the year 2000, several other Polish artists from the post-war generation, a bit younger than herself, addressed the issues of Holocaust, like Mirosław Bałka in his videos and installations, and also Artur Żmijewski in his challenging and controversial videos. What is unique about Robb-Narbutt art is that she spoke about her own experience, her own family, offering remembrance and honoring individual lives. This way, her art becomes an important testimony too. She was able to find a way to talk about tragic past so it could become part of the collective memory. And I'd like to thank you for the attention and play a video.
Nie znam nikogo z rodziny. Wiesz, mama się uratowała z getta, mamę uratował tata, więc to są dwie osoby. No i żyje mój brat, który ma dzieci, to jest, prawda, nasza rodzina. Z jakiejś wielkiej rodziny, której ja w ogóle nie znam. Nigdy nie znałam, prawda? Nigdy nie widziałam. Mogę sobie wyobrazić tylko. Której znam dwa imiona. Imię babci Pesa i imię mamy siostry Róża. I wiesz, i nic nie wiem dalej. A później sobie pomyślałam, że to jest w jakiś sposób taki podstępny dar, który oni mi dali. Ponieważ wobec tego ta rodzina może być wszystkim. prawda? Ten mój wuj, który, ja go mogę zmieniać, on może być raz, wiesz, taki, a raz taki. Bliźniaki mogą być, wiesz, raz chłopcami, raz dziewczynkami i tak dalej. Tych okruszków opowieści mojej mamy ułożyłam taką esencję historii rodziny, tego co wiem. To są te gabloty i tam, gdzie jest ta, wiesz, był ten cytat z wiersza Selana, którego ja bardzo cenię, który, jak wiecie, napisał taki wiersz o śmierci, to i przepłacił to zresztą, te pisanie i to, że był Żydem i że tyle przeżył śmiercią w Sekwanie, bo on się utopił, to ja, wiesz, ja mam takie, że nie wiadomo, czy żyliśmy, że ja mam takie, że wiesz, że po prostu może najlepiej też byłoby, żeby tego wszystkiego nie było, prawda, że tak naprawdę wszyscy by chcieli, żeby to nagle gdzieś, wiesz, takie czary i nie ma tego, nie mamy problemu.
There was only a small fragment from the video where Krystiana was talking about her story, and her friend Eva Stawecka made this video in 2006, the year when Krystiana died, a few months later. And in her video, she was talking to high school students, actually. And when I saw this video, I was very moved because I heard her talking about her family for the first time. We were close friends. We knew each other for 30 years, and we never talked about it. She never talked about what had happened to her family. We talked about all intimate subjects possible, but not this one. And I never talked about my family either and what happened to them. I think the reason was that they didn't talk about it. They just never talked about it. They didn't, as if they never existed. And I feel it as if they wanted to put some kind of a curtain of silence to separate us from the past. So there was that curtain which was supposed to protect them, protect privacy of their pain, and it was supposed to protect us as well. And I never wanted to peek behind that curtain. I knew that there was some kind of a black hole behind, and I didn't want to confront it. But Krystiana was different. Her attitude was different, and I think it was much more courageous, that she always was very close to that curtain. She wanted to know. And I remember once she said that her ultimate goal as an artist was to draw a black hole, a ditch in the ground. And I think that this is actually artist's task, to penetrate silence, to uncover subjects that are omitted from everyday conversation, that they are blocked by social taboo, or they are just very difficult to formulate. But my feeling is that she was penetrating the silence in a very intuitive way, that she just kept on asking. She was searching, but the questions were asked and dropped. There was just hint given, and that was her art. And it's so difficult to talk about it because it's about silence. It comes from silence and it returns to silence. And it's so and it's so intimate. And she drew her mountains for so many years, and she exhibited in Warsaw and around Poland. And it was interesting that her art was sort of interpreted in a very traditional way, like that was a meditation on Holocaust was actually never mentioned, which now surprises me. How come? Because it seems clear. But that was considered from the point of romanticism, that it was symbolic, and the mountain was seen in a romantic tradition of the sublime. And to me, that kind of symbolism was dead. I could never relate to this. But there was something that I really related, and that was a strange ambiguity, emotional ambiguity, that I sensed from her drawings. That on one hand, there was something ominous in those mountains, that they were looming over the horizon, but they had that element of happy promise as well, something very soft. And I had an insight to her work when I talked to her when she was preparing her first installation for Próżna Street that Dorota was talking about. That was her very first installation, and she dedicated her installation to David Rabinowicz, a Jewish boy who kept a diary like Anne Frank kept, and the diary was then found. And I happened to be in Warsaw, and we talked, and I saw her very emotional, very animated, and she was thinking about this installation, and almost like in a trance. And I noticed that she was not actually thinking about the installation as a kind of a technical thing that one has to produce. She completely focused on that boy. That was my feeling, that she wanted to comfort him. And that was what she focused on, how to comfort him, that she imagined him in that room and she wanted to bring some solace to him. So she talked about planting grass on a floor or projecting blue sky on a ceiling. And I said, Krystiana, wake up, you cannot do this, it's not going to work. And I saw that she actually got this message, and the artist that she was took over, and she came up with a technical solution for the installation. And she used the mirror ball. She hid it behind the window, and the mirror ball was casting like flickers of light on the walls, and it was that effect that every child likes and makes you smile. So that I thought what she was also doing in her drawings, that she was bringing these two things together: terror, something terrifying, and at the same time a relief, some kind of a healing moment was coming with it. So I thought that when I think about art that deals with Holocaust, she had a very soft, very soothing touch, very light, and I thought that was her gift, that she found that way of expressing. Thank you.
Sit there.
Now, maybe I will just ask one question to each of the panelists. Just wanted to say that I also knew Krystiana, though not as well. She was a student at the same time that I was a student. She was studying across Krakowskie Przedmieście. So we knew each other. And I was friends with some of her colleagues from a painting class, I think. Yeah. I wanted to ask, I have one question to both Dorota and Marek. And my question is the following. In this Próżna exhibit, Krystiana had explanations under the panels. Now, in the art in which there's no book with Hebrew letters, how do you know that it's the Holocaust art? What is the definition of the Holocaust art?
We did not want to define it as simply and to produce such a definition, such a label. We just think that one should consider her art in relation to these events, since now it's also it's a result of the whole change in looking at art history and also looking at the history, and you are part of it. So we also refer to your research and to your achievements as a historian. So I think it's a like a great movement to rewrite and to understand and to look at the history of Polish art from this perspective. And we did not want to like close this problem, like to give the label, but rather to open and to ask if the writers that we invited for the book to contribute to the book, what they see, what they can tell us about it, and that's why they discovered this subject, this undercurrent in her art. It's not what we imposed and we wanted them to tell us. It's what we kind of get to know from their texts. So that was a discovery, and it was not our. At all, it was not our plan to like impose those.
All right. Well, I have to say I didn't see the Próżna exhibition, so I only know it from reproductions. But I think Dorota, in her presentation, she said something very important, and maybe that could be interesting for everybody to realize. Because, like as Wanda said, Krystiana didn't speak much about her Jewishness, or even less about her art having anything to do with being Jewish. However, I think what happened that. As the change came in the late 1980s and early 1990s, and there was a gradual kind of revival of interest in the Jewish subjects, and Dorota mentioned some artists who produced works which reference the Holocaust and so on. I think Krystiana sort of realized that she had a mission, that there was a lot of, not a lot, but there were people who made works which dealt with the trauma in a profound way. There were people in Poland who sort of used the subject to introduce themselves to the international audience. And I think that was the moment when she said to herself, and I'm only speculating, obviously, that this was in a way her mission to participate, but in a deep way, in a way that she would talk about her experience, even if it was not direct. I mean, although, she was born at the very end of the war, so the war was still very present and everything that came with the war. And I think it was not only an artistic choice, but it was also an obligation that she felt that she had to maybe to expand that conversation into the conversation that she knew about, and she maybe suppressed it for a long time. And I think that's where the depth of her work resides, because, as you mentioned, there are a number of people who have done videos which personally I found quite questionable. But Krystiana did it from inside. That was something very natural, and there was a sense of obligation which kind of motivated her to engage in that subject.
So I was really asking about what is characteristic of this art. So I wasn't really challenging the the designation. The thing that is striking to me, and which I understand, but which would be worthwhile mentioning, repeating what Wanda, you said, was that she did not talk about it. And in fact, my question was mostly about the art before she started to really explicitly talk about the Holocaust. And obviously, if we look at the fact that her mother or her parents and her mother gave her the name Krystiana, I mean, the most Christian name that can be. It is like kind of a barrier that had to be overcome in order to talk about it. You mentioned that her reluctance about it. So I'm very interested in what about the problem of overcoming. That is, you said that the parents didn't, her parents and your parents, and there were many parents like that who did not mention anything about their experience and the family that perished and so on. Now, this was to protect, you said, us, and to protect themselves also from exposing their pain. But also, there was some kind of a I don't know, shame behind it. Mm-hmm. So this is what I'm very interested in this process of her painting before, if it is before it's Holocaust art or art that refers to Holocaust, that is so inexplicit that she doesn't know about it herself. So maybe we make a mistake kind of naming it a Holocaust art. Maybe she had two stages in her art, that the first part of art was a non-Holocaust art. Mm-hmm. This is, yeah?
Well, I think that if I may say just that one thing about Krystiana's identity, that we shouldn't make it sort of black and white. It's not like you were either Jewish or not Jewish. In a way, she belonged to something else, I think, and her family. They belonged to an intellectual milieu where those boundaries were as present as they were both present and absent, that you could that was a different sort of, it wasn't, as I said, it wasn't either or. And I think Krystiana accepted this for a long time until it got to the point where she wanted to make it more explicit about where she comes from. So that's how I see it. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't see it, either or. I think she was very comfortable to be sort of in between in some ways, and that's maybe what Wanda was speaking about, that black hole, this was a black hole, but in fact she was not alone there. There were other people, and that's what constituted her environment, her milieu.
I would say that I think that you pointed to the feeling of shame, and that's very accurate. I think that shame was part of our emotional landscape, And if we didn't hear our family stories and they were hidden from us, we kind of subconsciously even could assume that there was something shameless about it, that if one doesn't talk, it must mean something of that kind. But in Krystiana's case, it was interesting that she didn't hide her Jewishness at all. And to me, she was a wonderful person in showing her background so openly. And I think one of the reasons was that she came from such a wonderful family and that she was proud of it, that her father was fighting during the war as a commander, and he was a charismatic person. It was quite unusual. And her mother, she was a painter, they had a beautiful tradition, and she was proud of it, and she was representing this tradition. She was carrying on this tradition. So I thought that was really wonderful.
Her father's first book was a collection called Sacco and Vincenti. So, I mean, that was what he wrote in the 1930s.
So please, if you have questions.
I have an easy question, Marek. Did she ever recreate the art that she destroyed?
No, she never did it. I mean, we kind of lamented it in a way, you know. We said, you know, I said to her, you know, maybe you should be pragmatic, but that was a joke. I mean, that was, Krystiana had a very particular sense of pragmatism because, you know, we sort of got on a very sentimental mode, and you have to understand it's very difficult to speak about a dear friend that is not with us anymore. But there was another Krystiana who was a wonderful person. She, you know, we talked about this with Wanda and other friends, that she had an incredible sense of lucidity. You know, she was able to. Krystiana had health problems too. You know, she had strong migraines for a long, long time, and then there were days when she was not very functioning at all. And then there were moments like, you know, when she read her poetry, or when there were, you know, book signings or interviews, when she could transform herself into a very, very conscious person and very structured. You know, she was brilliant in the way how she could, and in her work in a way reflects this, the double, the kind of the fluidity of the touch, and then the touches that she gathers together in such a wonderful and methodical sort of way. So I'm just sort of digressing, but basically going back to the idea that there were certain things, and that's what I mentioned, after 1990s and before 1990s, you know, Polish art today can be very pragmatic, and Polish artists can be very materialistic. They know the value of their art. You know, she belongs to the time when there was no value, you know, there was only the absolute value, which had nothing to do with, you know, with sort of how much it would cost, especially in the West, because obviously people were selling their work in Poland and they were collected by museums. So I see her, you know, sort of reflecting whether I should do it and shouldn't, and then she decided she wouldn't do it. So she never did. I think that thing exists, but in a strange.
She called her show Nostalgia,
Right.
That you mentioned that she resisted your idea.
Right.
At the end, she called her show.
Yes.
But Nostalgia is somewhere else.
Yeah.
Thank you for the very interesting presentation. Not knowing the art of Krystiana Robb-Narbutt, first of all, my first question is where one can see her work. Is it in Poland? Is it elsewhere? I haven't seen the book either. Number two, it seems that there is a great demand for dealing with this problem, and perhaps she as an artist has dealt with it in a very special way, which is what I'm getting. But I think that the problem, as you said, that of talking with pride about the Jewish background is a problem of many people from this generation, my generation, have had, and the fact that it was suppressed was a great internal trauma that has caused a lot of problems for people, for individuals. And so it might be important that somebody with artistic ability, and I don't know her art, as I said, I would like to see it now, has made a specific contribution, important contribution in that respect.
Well, I guess her work, it's the only time when we did something with her work was in 2006, just before she died, so we included several of her works in that show that I mentioned. I think it would be wonderful if YIVO or any other place thinks about organizing her show. I think it would be very illuminating and maybe cast a new light on the way how we address the question of Jewishness in contemporary art.
If we have a couple of copies of the book, so if you are interested, we will give it to you, and we enjoy if you like it. And her work are in Poland. They are in the collection of her family. So it is they are quite easy to access. It's if you are interested, or any of you. But on the other hand, they are not much in the national collection in Poland. So we have the whole reconstructing of contemporary art museum scene in Poland has just started. So the museums now, we are kind of building the museums. We have a lot. We have just one museum in Kraków and the other in Łódź, and the other contemporary museum are in process of construction. So it is true that Polish contemporary art is quite difficult to see, and Krystiana Robb-Narbutt belongs to this area that it's not publicly exhibited.
But there is a book.
Also, there is a book
which has an English version with reproductions. And
the idea was to print it in English so that her work is possible to access, to be, and that's why we wanted so much to publish it in both languages.
Yeah, I wasn't involved with the book, so in a way I can praise it without feeling shameless. I think it's a wonderful book. It was a challenge because, as we mentioned, it's a kind of a new take on Krystiana's work. When I wrote my essay, when other people wrote, we approached it very differently from the authors, who participated in this project. So it has sort of this contemporary spin on it. So as Dorota and Wanda mentioned, it has the feminist aspect. It has sort of this, what I guess nowadays it's called in Eastern Europe, post-colonial kind of discourse, right? Which I think that's how it is called. It sort of refers to, what happened before and after the shoot of the Berlin Wall. So, and both of them, Dorota, who is very much present in the contemporary art landscape in Poland, she was the chief critic of the Gazeta Wyborcza, which is the main kind of the equivalent of the New York Times. She gathered a wonderful group of youngish critics, I guess, and who some of them did not know Krystiana's work at all, right? They just discovered because of this project, and that's what makes it probably very interesting too.
Other questions?
More of an observation. I'm a student at YIVO, and every week worlds are introduced to us, and this is a world. You have really given us a world. I want to make a comment because your presentation is very emotional, and there's a hesitancy in your speech. But I must tell you that the message is loud and clear. The work speaks for itself. You are a testament to her. It's a great thing that you're taking this woman's struggle. It's almost like a birth. And from what you showed us, the few things that we see, it almost like the figures in the beginning during the period of suppression. It's like a pregnancy. You see in the field these kind of shapes that look like an egg, and maybe with the little barbed wire, and how she got through that, how she was able to be born out of that, and then almost showing a sense of perverse humor, like the teddy bear that is hanging. But it's a macabre thing, and it's marvelous, and it's going to open up a discussion, I'm telling you. I went to Poland, and I met Polish people, and I went there because of what you say, the wall of silence, which reaches every Jewish family that was from Eastern Europe. For most of us, it was really a wall of silence. Maybe in Eastern Europe it was, suppressed in a more political way, but here it was emotional suppression. So this, I'm telling you, this artist that I never heard of, really, she's going to be a spokeswoman with your help.
Okay, we can take a few more questions.
Oh, I just want to thank you for this what you said, and I'm very happy to hear that you understood and you this our message. And I just want to add that the idea of the book was to present whole her output. You said, Marek, that for you the most important years were 70s in her art. And
I didn't say they were the most important. I just said there was something very important that happened in this.
And for us, our focus was more on the later work, and we discovered that, and maybe that was also her discovery, that when she left these more traditional sort of tools like drawing or painting, she was forced into this difficult subject, because when touching the object, the material remnants of things, she maybe discovered the way, she found a way to her memory. So we wanted to describe this process when an artist, maybe she didn't know that she wants to achieve or to touch this subject, but when she touched the things, the object, the subject, the theme appeared. So that was our idea, to show how the artist is working with substance, with things. And we didn't want to impose anything, and we just saw we saw this process as a result, and that was also discovery for us. I mean, we didn't know what we will.
I think also before I just realized one thing, that it's also, I think it's very important to think about Krystiana staying in Poland. Not, we three of us, we left, right? Dorota, well, you've always lived in Poland. You had some moments when you went abroad, but taking in consideration Krystiana's background, her Jewish background, I think it's worth exploring sort of the idea what happened when she stayed, when she decided. She had her brother left. Her brother left when he was 19 in 1968. Krystiana and her mother actually had a chance. I mean, her mother went to Paris, and they could stay in the West. They did go back to Poland. So what does it mean, I think, and how it reflects in her work? I think it's also a very interesting question. I mean, it's probably not for a discussion today, but just as a kind of a reflection on, you know, how we are divided and at the same time we are all together.
Yes, I think Dorota has already addressed this in a way in her latest comments. I'm particularly intrigued by the boxes because obviously they are frames, but they're also containers. And I was wondering if you can tell us more about the whole collection of boxes in terms of the period, the subjects, and the relationship with the material objects, right? I mean, we're not really talking about objets trouvés, but objects that she was finding in her home, where these family treasures, it seems like it's not something random, but actually something that has to do with a search, with a quest, right? There seems to be a story in the box rather than a random collection. I'm intrigued by this concept because I'm looking at the art of another artist who worked in a similar way. And I'm thinking of arte povera all the way through. So my question is also to do with influences of other movements that, you know, were going on, for example, in the 70s.
To me, the thing that she collected, she was a collector of things, and I think that was sort of that she tried to recreate some sort of landscape, a world for herself, that she liked to be surrounded by objects, and that she sort of recreated the past, but it was the fictional past, because her family was left after the war with no remnants, no objects, no pamiątki to będzie no souvenirs, nothing. So she was also with her mother. They were staying together for a long time, living in the same apartment, and they had their studios in this apartment. So they recreated kind of a world. And Krystiana, at the very end of her life, had this insight that she should close some of these objects in the boxes. And we have a wonderful text by Adam Lipschitz about the philosophical idea of making these statements by closing objects into glass boxes. And these boxes, they don't always refer to the traumatic past. They have a full sense of irony, of humor. Sometimes she put sweets into the boxes. What else? She would put a cake that would decay afterwards. So it was full. It was a sort of humor in it.
And it's also,
it's
I think, worth
observation.
Mentioning that she and her husband, they were avid collectors. They were just passionate collectors, both of them. And they collected primitive art, they collected kitsch, religious kitsch, all kinds of bizarre objects. And the place was it's hard to describe. And it seemed that they had a very particular eye, like let's say to collect kitsch. They weren't looking for anything sort of cute or charming. And Krystiana had a very sharp sense of kitsch. And when we were talking about shame, she was always exploring these zones, like that mushy part in us, that sentimental part is also protected we control it, and she could see it in a religious kitsch, and she saw it naked, like she saw this part of us, and it wasn't any cute or charming, it was there like a real feeling, and she was taking those figurines like of pious altar boy, and she would separate this thing, and she would put it into the box, and you would see it from a completely different perspective.
Yeah, we shouldn't forget also she collected dust. I mean, that was, it's true.
And
I mean,
trash.
Yes, and trash. That was part of the collecting part, which has a very metaphorical function, obviously, too. But there was a lot of dust sometimes. Yeah. And the dust was protected. It wasn't just because nobody had time to vacuum. No, it was a statement, I think, and a very important statement, I think.
We have time for one more question. Okay.
Please forgive me, I'm a little perhaps ignorant about what was going on in Poland during the communist era, but no one's really mentioned the censorship and suppression, from outside the family wall or of shame, but also what was going on in the culture, in the society at large. So how did the artists even have a chance to explore the Holocaust or even their own identities post-Holocaust, when there must have been tremendous governmental censorship and suppression going on too? Is that correct or is that wrong?
I think I mentioned that for me, the turning point it's 1989, when the censorship goes away and there is freedom of speech. But the problem is how to start to use it. And you can notice that artists started to use this freedom of speech, and they realized that they are free to touch, to talk about whatever they want a bit later. Because it's always like this, that we are a bit behind the possibilities. And that's how her art developed. It's the proof that she was slower than history, but she could catch up with it. And then she decided that she also has to make her statement. And that's how art works. Actually, the situation of censorship was very harsh, and you can say more about how history was manipulated, and you wrote books about it. So I think Irena is an expert, and but of course it was our experience that we are so much limited and so bound that it's better not to say anything than to lie. So that's sure that political.
Krystiana was arrested in 1968. Actually, she spent several months in jail because 1968 was a very, very difficult year, and in Poland it was a double hit because there was March 1968 when a lot of Jewish people were expelled from Poland, and then later there was the invasion of Czechoslovakia. So Krystiana sort of participated in those historical events in a way that I wouldn't call her a dissident. I don't know, maybe Wanda or you would disagree, but I felt because she got it from her parents. They were pre-war leftist intellectuals, but also activists who believed in sense of justice. And I think this what she got from her parents, and that's how she reacted to any situation. And probably she would do it the same way in Paris or here in the United States as she did in Warsaw. You know, that there was sort of a essential moral obligation to reject, you know, the taking away the freedom of speech or the freedom of expression. And her work. I don't know if she, at that time, she was very young, if she felt like she needed to respond directly in her work. And also you have to remember that there was this whole period of socialist realism in Poland and in Eastern Europe, and art which spoke directly about political issues was considered sort of very retrogressive. So she was also probably reacting to this. But censorship was sort of like a second nature. People sort of felt that it was there, right? We didn't have to feel it directly. We knew that it was there. So in a way, Krystiana was very aware of that as well.
I think that there was a lot of art in Poland about the Holocaust right after the war by the people by some of the artists and painters, especially who survived the war. But then there was going away from that subject. And then you are right, in 1989 it opened again. So it was very. She went. She was not the only one, and her efforts were efforts of many other people who started to write about it, think about it, came out from behind this iron curtain of memory. I wanted to thank very much the panelists and the questions, and I'm really very happy that we had an occasion of really hosting Krystiana here in New York, in YIVO, and with all of us. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.